It appears we're getting very close to a decision on whether a grand jury will find there's probable cause for charges in the case of the Tamir Rice shooting and death at the hands of Cleveland police. There have been a bunch of developments in the past week, and that is what we are here to talk about today on The Opinion Show. And we get together with members of the editorial board of the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, for a discussion. So we'll start chronologically. Over the weekend, we received an enhanced set of images from the video taken when Tamir was shot by police. And what it showed for the first time very clearly is that Tamir could see the approaching police car, walked toward it, and according to the prosecutor's office interpretation of it, reached for the gun and lifted before he was shot. The idea, I think, in releasing this was to show the community this wasn't what it had appeared to be up until now, which was Tamir standing there quietly when a police car lurches up and shoots him. The question I keep asking people is, has this development or any other development changed anybody's mind on this very polarized issue? So what is your read of what this shows?
Well, the thing that troubles me about all this investigation is it seems to have boiled down into sides. You know, there's the prosecutor's office is supposed to be trying to seek justice, and it seems like it's one side seeking justice and the other side seeking revenge. And so we have one side's experts and the other side's experts. I don't think that...
Well, let's stick to the video. We'll get to the experts in a minute.
Oh, okay.
So with the video, the difference being that there's probably a 10-second piece of time now where we can see the movement. Does that offer any enlightenment on as to whether the police were reasonable in their shooting?
It explains why the shots were fired so quickly, sure. You know, I think if that's the case and that's what the officer saw, I've been wondering all along about this, why it happened so quickly, and whether they said something to Tamir through the loudspeaker, which I've never heard that they've done, and it happened so quickly. But if they saw that before that, then I think that's getting persuasive.
Anybody else?
Well, I think that, you know, the explanation from the prosecutor's office of what they think these you know, split screen show is one thing, but I don't think that that's necessarily the definitive explanation, right? It depends. Even looking at, you know, the screen by screen shots, it's really unclear what Tamir is doing when he's reaching toward his waistband. You know, is he adjusting his sweatshirt? Is he making sure that his toy gun doesn't fall? You just don't know. Though, again, from the officer's perspective, and they gave their statements, and I guess we'll talk about that in a short bit, but they clearly, both of them, you know, saw that his move was aggressive.
Yeah, I think it still raises some questions to me. I mean, yes, it seems like they saw before them a credible threat, but then once again, there's not been enough explanation, even in their statements, which we're going to talk about later, about why they rolled in so closely, and you know, whether or not that was best police procedure, which I understand some experts have said is not, and did not really give themselves enough room for cover.
I mean, yeah, I think objective observers all along have felt like, you know, it appeared that Tamir was reaching for something, and that this very well could have been the situation. So I'm not sure that this sheds a whole lot of new light on it. Maybe it does make that argument a little stronger, but as Sharon said, that really isn't the key issue, is whether or not he was pulling.
Okay, then let's move on to the two expert statements that were provided by the lawyers for Tamir's family, lawyers who are engaged in a civil suit and do have a financial incentive to have an indictment come out. These two experts appear, by everything you can see of their history, to be quite qualified. And unlike the three experts that the prosecutor's office had provided us previously, these two find that the shooting was not reasonable. They found a bunch of things that hadn't really been addressed by the prosecution experts, that, for instance, the officers created the situation that resulted in deadly force and have some vulnerability in the criminal sphere because of that. They also went into detail about how the officer shouldn't have been hired, which really doesn't deal with the criminality, and it's kind of a red herring in there. But now we have two experts completely contradicting the previous experts, and McGinty's office has said we will bring them in and have them speak to the grand jury. Does that change anybody's thought about what happened?
Again,
Let me just weigh in, since I already started on that, and I just think that it's offensive to the seeking of justice in this, that the lawyers for Tamir's family are attacking the prosecutor before he's even made his case or before.
But McGinty did invite them to bring their own experts.
Oh yeah, I know, but I mean, the whole feeling of this thing is an attack. They don't trust him. They don't believe he's going to try to to reach a just resolution to this thing. And they've said they've tried to get him replaced, and he really hasn't done anything, I don't think, to deserve that kind of attitude. And
But to me, this is more of a question whether or not the grand jury is entitled to hear all different sides of this. I mean, I'm going to guess that 5-10 years from now, I could see someone in police academy using these series of videos to teach people what to do and what not to do, and arguing, having a good, vigorous classroom argument about, what are the best police practices that were here and which ones were, totally went south.
Hasn't he said though that he's going to forward those to the grand jury?
He
Yes.
has,
Oh, yes.
he
Yeah.
said
Absolutely.
immediately
So,
that he
I mean,
would,
that's the
which
point of them doing
ironically
their own
will extend the
investigation.
deliberations of the grand jury
Right, the
even
timing.
more. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, the job of the grand jury, if I understand it correctly, is to look at the information in the best light of the prosecution as to whether or not to indict. It's not to decide whether or not there's guilt or innocence.
Right.
So it is pretty easy for a grand jury to indict. Now, I would also say that, and so if they don't, then I think it's largely because there was an effort to put in so much evidence that it's kind of
They're overwhelmed.
they're overwhelmed by it. But I guarantee you, there's not a single crime that's been or incident that's occurred in the last 5-10 years that will be so scrutinized by a grand jury. This is way more information than the grand jury would ever see in an incident.
Well,
And
no,
I-
the Brelo case, the shooting.
Well, okay,
was
there's
Cleveland.
That's the second one.
but it's a similar situation.
But on the other hand, I do think this shows McGinty really bending over backwards to allow the Tamir Rice side of the story to be told to the grand jury.
Well, they called his bluff.
I was about to say, yeah.
when his witness statements were attacked, he said, well, by all means, bring others. And once they do, if he doesn't bring them in, he's
Right.
not living up to his
But
word.
he also let, Tamir's mother, Samaria,
that's true.
testify, and that's,
That's unusual.
It is unusual,
Yeah. 'Cause she wasn't at the
she's
scene when
making
it
an
occurred,
emotional
so she's not a witness.
appeal
Yeah.
to the jury.
But again, that's not what I don't think that's what the grand jury's
All right.
purpose is.
One of the interesting
It's to
things, though,
indict
is
or
the way
not.
that Chris has phrased both of his questions to us is, has it changed your mind? And I think your point is that although these developments seem to be heaping upon one another, that in essence, the community is in divided camps, and these aren't changing people's
Exactly. And
minds.
before we get to the most
Could I-
recent and probably the most important development, the reason I bring this up is I wrote a column this week that explained why we don't accept comments on news stories about Tamir. And it has just under 2,000 comments from people who are completely and utterly divided. There is no gray area either, and we're in the bags of both camps, according to the comments. Either the police are completely and utterly wrong and should be prosecuted to within an inch of their lives, or the complete are utterly and positively right in what they did, and there's
And
no
both sides
debate.
are completely wrong.
Well, okay, so
Because it's not. It's so gray. It's as gray as Ted's
I was
jacket.
just,
I mean,
and yours.
and,
you know, but
and mine.
I was
But-
just thinking the same thing,
Yeah.
though. It's totally gray.
Yeah.
And that's, that's part of the problem.
well, it comes, but the part that's not gray is, if you indict them, you have to have an act of criminality, a law they violated. And the argument from those who say they did is, well, it's aggravated murder. What are the elements of the crime? And
The
you have-
crime, as we've said before many times, is the way that these officers approached the scene and were apparently trained in the fact that Lohman shouldn't even have been on the force. Now, whether or not that rises to a crime based on the statutes of the state of Ohio or what have you, maybe not. But that is
Right,
the
that's
problem.
the segue
But
into the.
but you can't accuse somebody of a crime for being hired when he shouldn't have been.
I say
No,
crime
mean-
with quotes,
Oh,
Betsy.
okay.
I said whether or not that
Okay,
rises
but
to a
that
crime.
is a segue, because we now have heard from the officers.
Yeah.
A year plus later, the two officers have given statements to the sheriff's office and have appeared and been sworn in before the grand jury. We don't know what they said, but you can pretty much presume they said what was in their statements. And what they say is that they had the call about somebody waving a gun. They approached as they did because they believed he was on the swings, and when he wasn't on the swings, they thought he was going to head over to the Cadell Recreation Center, and a gunman going to the recreation center is a bad thing. They sought to cut him off. The car slid in the mud, they intended to stop earlier. They both claim they were repeatedly screaming, "Show your hands." The timing of that is not really explained. A lot of people have raised questions about could they have said that, because the minute Lohman gets out of the car, he shoots him, but it sounds like they're saying they were screaming it from the car. They don't remember if the
Could the kid
windows
have
were
heard?
open.
Right.
And he reaches for the gun. They believe that there's a danger, and they shoot him. So they're saying, basically, according to their training, their practice, they took the tactics they did and had no choice but to do what they did.
Although there is one witness statement in the Sheriff's Department investigation that heard the warnings being shouted after the apparent gunfire.
But that would actually kind of jibe with this, because if they're pulling up yelling that, and Lohman gets out opening the door while the driver is still yelling it, that could actually work into what that previous.
If it's the
witness
driver
said.
yelling it, not the shooter.
They
not-
both
not
said,
Lohman.
they
Yeah.
both testified they were both screaming it. So,
Yeah.
again, does that change
Yeah,
anybody's
you
mind?
asked about changing minds, and in reading their statements, I thought there were a couple things that, again, went to explaining what happened. And one was the skidding, how far the car skidded. He didn't mean to pull up, according to him, as close to to Tamir as he was, and that statement was issued, I guess, right after it happened. So it was,
Well, and that was
No.
confirmed by an Ohio Highway Patrol study of what happened.
but anyway, it just, you can understand that a little bit more. And the other
Yeah.
thing was, it's the first time I've read about the size of Tamir. You drive up and you see somebody 195 pounds, that doesn't say 12 years old to you.
Well, that
no,
was in
we've
the
done that.
sheriff's
We've known that.
report.
This is the
Yeah.
first time the police are describing what
What they
they
saw.
perceive to be.
Okay. Well, I kept asking how big he was, and nobody seemed to know.
Oh, no, no,
Well,
that's
Well,
I
why
do
would-
thi- I
Sheriff's
do think it's
report,
important
but not
to
at
note
first.
that these statements were not given right after the events. They were given much more recently. They did not give statements to the Sheriff's Department when they were doing their original investigation.
And y'all, yeah.
So, I mean, to me, the statements are revealing, but nonetheless, there's been a significant passage of time since since the event
Right.
and when they were given.
And those statements obviously were looked at by their attorneys, and you read that statement, and it's the way the kind of facts are presented and the sentences are structured, it's like, it's not how somebody would just talk if you said, okay, tell me what happened, you know what I mean? So it's very kind of, it's somewhat calculated, I think, in the way those statements were made.
Let me
But
get to a key point, because
okay.
we're running out of time,
All right.
and it's the purpose of doing this as the subject today. So we have a polarized community, and nobody's changing their mind.
Right.
So half of the community is going to be most upset with whatever happens. There are leaders in this town that are drawing a line in the sand, saying if X doesn't happen, bad things will result. And again, since half of this community is going to be upset, what does that mean for the leadership of this community once a decision is made?
Well, I mean, we have editorialized directly to this point that it is important that there be a unified front from the leadership of this community, no matter what the outcome of the grand jury deliberations, that is very focused on a constructive way forward, reforms in the police department, because clearly we know that the hiring practice was messed up. There should be much clearer procedures when you're approaching a potentially armed suspect, The dispatcher here completely blew it, right? The fact that there was no communication with an off-duty police officer who was actually in the Cudell Recreation Center, I think was a significant lapse, and the failure to administer immediate first aid to Tamir also.
Although
So-
I don't think the first aid was going to save his life. But
Well,
I agree that they
but
should have done it,
to-
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
try.
Yeah.
There are cases where it might, too.
Yeah.
Maybe
You don't
That's
have to-
possible.
That's
Yeah,
true.
You have to
that's
wait on
possible.
some
Clearly a
FBI guy
mistake,
to
you know,
run.
Clearly a
you
mistake,
know, no matter
yes.
what. You know,
Yeah.
and that goes back to the gray area again, but, you know, I think, you know, my problem with it is that, you know, that there's a quest for justice, I believe, by the prosecutor's office, and a quest for revenge from the other side. And you know, if the revenge is not satisfied, there's going to be a lot of trouble.
And again, I go back to one point, and it's totally lost in this, is that Tamir should not have been in that rec center with that toy gun, you know?
I mean, outside.
Outside, yeah. He should not have been playing with a toy gun. The kid, even though he was 12 years old, he should have known better. Somebody should have told him. You know, I'm not going to blame Tamir, okay? I'm not going to say that he deserved what he got, because of course he didn't. But, you know,
But
That-
there must be lots of kids that play, because the off-duty police officer who was working there was told earlier in the day that there was a kid outside playing with a toy gun, and he didn't,
Yeah, he didn't
think it
even
was
budge.
worth doing it.
And
Well,
I gotta say
maybe
that
he
I
should
want
have
to say that
done
I saw
something
a
about it.
Toy Story, the play, this on Saturday, and there was a kid with his Red Ryder 12 gauge BB gun. He's pointing it everywhere. And
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
in some communities that would just be a
Right.
knock on parents' door, or in other communities, it's like we've had other shootings here, and we're on high alert. But I also wanted to say that I think that, you know, it's a quest for justice on both sides. We may not like how one of the sides is doing things, and you know that some of the ministers have drawn that line in the sand, but I think if they were here, they would say, we're also seeking justice for a 12-year-old kid who was killed, and to us it was murder. Now, you know, I don't know what the grand jury's going to say about
the
that.
backdrop of that is the sense that differential justice is administered based on the color of your skin, and that if he were a large white boy
He
playing
might have
with...
gotten that little bit of benefit of the doubt, and there's that, right, as a...
Okay, we're out of time, and obviously nobody's changing their mind. I don't suspect you'll be changing your mind, but we would like to see what you think in the comments where you find this post. It will be in the opinion section, where we do have comments on items about Tamir Rice, unlike in the news section. We'll see you next time.